I'd like to start by saying this. I think all people on the face of the earth are the same. I think when God created mankind, he created us essentially the same. We have the same hopes. We have the same dreams. We have the same longings. We have the same potential. And whether that potential is ever realized, that's what we're here to talk about. How do you live into the potential that God created you with? That's a lousy sentence, but it's okay. I put a period at the end of the preposition there. We can live with that just a little bit. All right, so my assumption is that mankind hasn't changed. Mankind still goes the same speed. We can't shortcut growing. It grows the same way. I mean, for instance, cutting teeth. Most of us have our teeth, or at least some of them, and we all, when we were young, got our teeth a few at a time, and no amount of yelling or spanking or withholding or something would speed up the process of growing teeth. You can't shortcut some processes, and so some of the processes we're going to talk about are just about being human. The problem is we live in a context that changes, and our context has changed dramatically in my lifetime. So now you need to know something about me. I was born last century. He already told you I was an old guy. He was kind of nice about it, but he said, 50 years I've been in this profession, so actually 60 almost, but I didn't want to tell him that. It doesn't matter. It's not my fault I'm my age. So here's what you need to know. I was born before World War II was over. Now, of course, I don't remember that because I didn't have any choice about when I was born. And that's one thing you can say to your children over and over again, which is really helpful. You can just look them in the eye and say, it's not your fault you're in this family. You didn't get to vote. So it helps them to realize there's some things they can't take ownership of. They're just stuck. It's not your fault you're your age. It's not my fault I'm my age. I'm just stuck with that. So I'm going to try to do my best at my age, right? Well, one of the things that I thought would help you frame what we're going to talk about tonight is when I grew up, we did not have television. Do you know why? It didn't exist. So I didn't get to have television until I was in elementary school. And then it was not in color. And I don't know how many of you are old enough to recognize what a test pattern is. Is there anybody in here that knows what a test pattern is? Come on, admit it. 2, 3, 4, 5 people. A test pattern is just a bullseye on a TV screen, and it just sits there. And we used to get excited over watching the test pattern because there weren't any shows. Today there's 100 golf channels, right? But there was 3 channels maybe, or 2 channels, and then they would warm up and they'd put this test pattern on. As kids, we would watch the test pattern. It wasn't terribly exciting, but we did. You know what happened? That was the first introduction into society of a device. What do we have as devices today? iPhones. So I'm going to talk about those. I'm going to talk about some research. It'll be tomorrow night related to the iPhone and what we know about the iPhone and its impact on our development. Tonight, I just want to warn you that that's coming, and it matters because it's changed dramatically how people grow, how people learn, how people develop, whether we develop in a robust, healthy, flourishing, resilient, life-giving, joyful way where we can make a contribution or not versus not so. So I was the first generation, essentially, that was introduced to a test pattern and shows and spending time in front of a TV, being a passive recipient, not really interacting because it's not an interactive device, although we do some interaction with ours, but it's not a reciprocated device by a living person. It is a passive piece of equipment that is very fascinating and very strong and very powerful and very exciting in a lot of ways, but it's also damaging to our relational dynamics. And it's getting stronger. We have a thing called AI now, ChatGPT, large language models. What's coming up is quantum computing, and people get really excited about that. And then robots, right? And they're going to take over our jobs, and we won't have to work anymore. Won't that be lovely, you know? And actually it won't, but that's beside the point. These things matter in our discussion. So in the back of your head, I'd like you to just be holding on to some of this and say, we have a chance to address these issues in such a way that they are neither vilified nor embraced, but they take their place, and we can utilize them for what they offer and shut them down or walk away from them or some other kind of thing. What my generation experienced was an enormous volume of interaction in the family systems and in cultural expectations. So neighborhoods mattered, volume of personnel that interacted with me. I lived in a city block in Denver, Colorado, and I could get into every garage in that block. That was my playground, other people's garages. Don't look at me like that, you know. Do you know what a garage is? I don't know. We had an alley, and that's where I played. Everybody knew me. So if I did something over here that wasn't lovely, my mother knew about it before I got home. She was a principal and a teacher for 40 years, so you can imagine what that was like. I mean, so we had these experiences that today, you know, most suburban housing doesn't have alleys. Do you know what an alley is? Yeah, well, okay. You know, it's changing, right? The landscape's changing, and it's changing faster than we can keep up with. And we think there's something wrong with us because we can't keep up with it, but we're still going the same speed we've always gone. I had a client one time, this was not terribly long ago, and he was frustrating to me because he was kind of not doing anything. He was coming, we'd have these great chats, he'd pay. That was good. I thought that was good. He'd pay, but then I felt bad because there wasn't any transformative change in him. He didn't show any difference, and nothing was happening. And one day he said, I'd like to be more like Jesus. And I said, well, walk to work, which is not terribly counselor-like. You know, that's not full of empathy and love and, you know, personal regard, et cetera. But anyway, he said, I just told him to walk to work. And I didn't think anything about it. I was just kind of my normal sarcastic self, and he left, and that was that. And then the next time he came in, he came into my office, and he was standing. Instead of sitting on the chair, he stood. And finally I looked up and I said, what? And he said, it'd take me 3 days. Now this has been a week or two, something like that. I said, 3 days? What are you talking about? He said, if I had to walk to work, it'd take me 3 days. He figured it out. So he could go to work 1 day a week, you know, is kind of what it would amount to, right? That's what's changed. Jesus went at 3 miles an hour, max, and not in a very big area. I flew out here in 3 hours or a little less. That's what, 1,200 miles or something like that? Hello. We take that for granted, don't we? That's not normal, folks. We don't go that fast. I mean, I went that fast in this tin can, but I can't make that happen that quickly. And then I have to make an adaptation to what? Time zones. And I have to make transitions that my body has a struggle with. I've been over to Europe a bunch of times, and I never did get jet lag down. It just took me forever. You know, I'd come home, and the older I get, the longer it takes. Why? Because I'm defying the speed at which we were designed to operate. Now, does that mean I shouldn't fly in a plane? No. Does that mean there's something morally bad about it? No. What's at issue is our context has changed dramatically, and it's impacting everything we experience. And the kids in this generation right now are hammered by lack of ability to be in relationship with another human face to face. We just don't have to do it anymore. We can do it all online. We can do it. I do a lot of my counseling online. I Zoom to people all over this country and overseas as well. And I'm grateful for it. But it's no substitute for sitting here face to face with another human being. There's no substitute. I've read researches on the power of counseling that ChatGPT can do. And what it does is it mirrors back to you what you give to it. And then it stops at a certain level, and it's very compelling, and it's almost addicting. But at some point, it runs out of the capacity to help in a significant way, simply because it's just pacifying you. It's not challenging you. It's not stretching you. It's not having you struggle in some way. It's not stretching you. It's not growing you up. And so we're here to talk about how do people grow? How do people grow over their lifetime? What are the ingredients that go into that? And I'm going to make a stab at giving you some resources and what little bit I know in terms of research and that, but it's just minuscule. I just want you to start with the fact that people haven't changed since they were born originally in the garden. We are the same people. We still have the same longings. We still have the same desires. We still have the same needs for connection. We still need love and affection and attention, and we still need to feel like we have the capacity to be capable people and significant people. And most people don't feel either capable or significant. Why? Because we miss that in our context. I read a little short article the other day that said you can buy coffee by ordering it, going into the store, ordering it and pay for it, go into the store, get it, and walk out and never have an interaction with anybody saying, hi, boo, kiss my foot, I love you. You know, nothing. You don't have to say anything. Why? But it's those pieces, those interactions, that human interaction is that what we're made for. We're made for relationship. And the biblical message is that God designed relationship to be the core, and the problem theologically is that a lot of people are desperately out of connection with God, and the whole purpose of the biblical message is to be back in relationship. So relationships are the driver of this, and what kind of relationships we have with our kids really matters. And so we're going to pick on little pieces of that, and you've got to come after me during Q&A to make sure you're getting the message I'm trying to give to you. But anyway, my point is, devices started when I was young. So I've lived through this massive amount of change. And I mean, it's massive. Now you're carrying in your pocket more computing power than the first man on the moon had in one of your smartphones. My phone's a genius phone. I don't know what you paid for. Mine does things I don't even ask it to do. I don't know about yours, but that's what I experience. I marvel at the technology, but it's robbing us of our souls a lot of times if we're not careful. So this is the context in which we're going to talk now. I have some data points I want to share with you, but the key element that I don't want you to forget is that you cannot shortcut maturity. It doesn't happen by chance. And it's not related to age. So at every age, you have a chance to mature, and it never ends. I'm married for 60 years last year, and we had a party, and they asked me to speak at the party, and I said something like, Henry Nouwen has a quote, and the quote goes something like this. He says, forgiveness is the name of love for people who love poorly. In other words, if you love poorly, you need to be forgiven for loving poorly. And he says, forgiveness is the name of love for people who love poorly. And then he waits just a minute, and he comes back and he says, and we all love poorly. The underlying message is we all need to learn how to forgive. And yet, most of us experience that very poorly, and it's hard for us to say we're sorry. And a lot of times, I know in family systems, which you're teaching and talking about, family systems, I know a ton of people that will say to me, My parents never said they were sorry. My mother never said she was sorry. My sister never said, well, where's that coming from? It's coming from an inadequate understanding of the human dynamic. And the only way you can get that is if you're in a big enough community that's healthy enough that they call you out in this and expose this, and then they say it's okay, and you can make a comeback, and there's a way to remedy the stuff that you did or didn't do or said or didn't say, or the way you acted or didn't act. That there is a way that you can grow, that you can recover, and that's the message. The message is, biblically, salvation. You can be saved from those patterns of behavior, but you have to have some understanding of how you get there. So, there's lots of spectrum for this, and we're going to talk primarily about the ages of 0, or a little less maybe, till, when does the brain come online? Do you know? What age? The whole brain functions at what age? 30, 27. Now what? The frontal cortex, the prefrontal cortex in a human does not come online until late in life, and it's the prefrontal cortex that gives you the capacity to make moral choices and to manage and regulate your own emotional system. You wonder why teenagers can't manage very well, or why they're so chaotic, and why we don't let them drive until they're what age in California?
15 and a half.
15 and a half here? That's pretty scary. Jeez. Put a 3,000-pound motor vehicle, in a 15-year-old. Why is the insurance so high? It's because their prefrontal cortex doesn't make good choices. It's incapable of doing that. That's a biological, neurobiological fact. So those pieces play in all this. Now, the culture recognizes it at some level, but we are carefree about some of the stuff that we're doing right now with children. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, or poke at it anyway, because there's too much going on here. All right? Yeah, all right. So maybe the easiest way for me to do this is to list some things up here as resources for you. And then Anthony said, I promised that I would go through 4 categories of development for children, and we'll do that in just a couple minutes, okay? First thing is, and I would put that down here as kind of a premise, and so if you're a note taker, you can do it this way. I'd put a line right here, and I'd say there are 2 things for children that you need to know about. Every child wants discipline. I'll give you a story here in just a minute about that. They want to be disciplined. Let's see. Okay. There was a gang member being interviewed by a major TV personality a long time ago, I think in the 70s maybe, or 80s. And it was a major personality newscaster, and he asked this guy, he said, why'd you join a gang? And the kid said, for the discipline. And it stopped the interviewer. The interviewer didn't know what to say to that. He didn't expect it, I don't think, and so he wasn't prepared, and so they cut away to a commercial, and he came back, and so he went back to that question, and he said, so why? Why did you join this gang? What do you mean for the discipline? And he said, well, the neighborhood I grew up in was undisciplined. So there was chaos in his neighborhood, and he said, when I went to school, it was chaos. So on the streets and in school, there was chaos. He said the only disciplined place was the gang. And still the guy didn't have much to say, but I still remember watching the interview and realizing he's saying something pretty significant. And kids are doing the same thing. So I think that I'd say it this way. Kids want discipline. They're just picky about who does it and how it's done. We really want to know, but it's important how we learn that. And if you have to crawl over how it's delivered, then that's hard too. My wife and I, when we were first married, she used to deliver messages to me in what I would call like a beer keg, right? She'd stick the message in the beer keg, and then she'd throw it at me. And it's a little hard to handle a beer keg coming through the air across the room, right, emotionally. And I would usually avoid it and, and just roll it out the door or something, theoretically. She never really did that. Relax. She's a tough girl, but she's not that tough anyway. So, but it was my picture of what she was delivering. She was delivering this harsh statement encapsulated in a very hard delivery system. So we clashed over that, and we made it, obviously, because we're still here 60 years later. We still argue. That's the nature of marriage. You know that. Why is this place so quiet? For pity's sakes, if you've been married 6 weeks, you know that. After 60 years, you still argue, or you should, because you're still different. You don't get rid of being different, and it should trigger your curiosity about the other person. But most of us have shut that down a long time ago because we've had too many beer cakes thrown to us, So she would send this message, and usually the message was pretty good if I could get to it, and I couldn't always get to it, and I wasn't sterling either, and I delivered messages to her in a different way that still wasn't very nice. And so we have these bad habit patterns even after 60 years, and we work at it, and we like each other. Growing up is hard. Maturing is hard. And one of the most difficult tasks on the planet is to be responsible in some way for the development of a kid who you don't own, and they're not yours. And the minute you think they are, you're going to mess them up for sure. Got that? They're their own person. They're entrusted to you for a season, and you need to have some skills. But here's the rule. You and I cannot give to another person what we don't have ourselves. If you don't get anything else out of tonight, that would be one message I would say take away. You can't give away what you don't have. If you're not maturing, if you're not a learner, if you're not growing, if you're not curious, if you don't stop and listen, if you don't slow down, if you don't know how to hug, if you can't do those things, guess what? You can't give them away. It's a deforming thing that we transfer to the next generation, our dysfunction, because we won't root it out. And I can't say enough. I've just listened to tiny snippets of what Alan's been talking about to this church about bloodlines. But it matters. It matters that you understand that. It matters that they don't have power to keep going unless you do something with it. You're not stuck. Nobody's stuck. You can transform your narrative. You're not stuck with your narrative. It's not the only way to look at stuff. But a lot of kids get stuck because it's so loud and they can't receive it too much. So the first thing is, every kid wants discipline. They're just picky about, what did I do with my pen? Anyway, did I eat it? Oh, it's in my pocket. It's been one of those days, guys. Now I have 2 pens. See, it's like a miracle. So they want discipline. They're just picky about who does it and how it's done. That's the first thing. Second thing, I'd say, there are 2 things that every kid asks. So this is how, and then 2 questions every kid asks, which this all has to do with the way kids look at growing up. And the questions are this: am I loved? That's the first one. Do I feel loved? Do I believe that somebody really loves me? And they love me because I'm here, and they delight in me? This is where I give a little lesson on how to delight in a child. The Bible says it this way. God says, I want you to look at my son in whom I'm well pleased. He doesn't say, I want you to look at my son Jesus and I'm proud of him. When you say you're proud of somebody, you're praising them. You need to delight in that person. I'm so glad you're here. I so delight in the way that you think. I don't understand how you got there. Can you help me? I'm just curious about how you're bent, how you're made. The Bible, Proverbs says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he'll not depart from it. And the idea about the way he should go, it simply means train up a child in the way he is bent, the way his personality is structured. If he's sensitive, be sensitive. If he's not, then be not. It's okay. The key is to know something, be a student of that child enough to know how he's bent. It's not like there's a right way and then we force everybody into this one hole. It's that each peg is different. And it's that difference that fouls us up, because we want a formula. We want a magic methodology. We want a technique. And I'll talk about some of those things, but by and large, this is not technique oriented. This is relationally oriented. And relationships have some skills. There are skills that are important, and we'll talk about those too. I got, I think, 4 skills I want to teach you and 3 perceptions. But the key is, can I understand better you? Can I work to understand you? Not to be understood. It's not whether you understand me or not. It's whether I can understand you. And so I have to learn how to ask questions. And that comes from being curious. Curiosity is one of the drivers of health. There, I said it, and I'm glad. Okay, so every kid wants to know if they're loved, and the second question they ask is this: what can I get away with? Do you hear me? Am I loved? And then what can I get away with? Get away with, okay? So every child wants to know, where's the line? And you say, right there's the line. And they say, that line? Yes, son, that line. Now, do you know why that's important? It's important psychologically as well as biblically. You're limited. I'm limited. We can't just do anything we want to. I had a client one time, a 10-year-old boy, that had run out into the street and got hit by a car. He ran into the side of a car that was driving down his block. And it sent him reeling. I mean, literally, he was rolling in the street. And when I got him, he was furious. Now, he was injured, pretty deeply injured. I don't think he broke anything, but it wasn't far off. And he was just furious. And I said, why are you so mad? I mean, where's that coming from? And he said, that wasn't supposed to happen. I said, what do you mean, why wasn't supposed to happen? He says, well, it's not supposed to hurt. And I said, well, help me understand, how did you get there? Why wouldn't running into a moving car and you rolling on the pavement not hurt? And he said, all he had gotten was that view from television. You can run into a car on television and get right up and go. It doesn't work that way in real life, does it? Why? Because we're finite and we're limited and we can't just do everything we want to. And we hate limits. Every one of us will test limits. We don't like commands. We don't typically like authority. There are exceptions and there are contexts in which that changes, but by and large, limits are something that we chafe at. I'm a rebel. I married a rebel. That's not a good combination. I just will tell you, we're both babies. That's not really optimal. But here's the point. We can't do anything about that, right? We're both babies and we're both rebels. So, okay, now what do we do with that, right? Well, we have to face our finiteness. I can't change you. You can't change me. So there. Or I need to change me. I need to grow. I need to work out my own stuff. I need to detoxify the traumas that have been perpetrated on me in some way. I need to begin to understand more dynamically what's going on with me. So every child on the planet says, am I loved, and how far can I go? What are my limits? Now, some of us back off from those limits so much that we don't do the work that we need to do. And other people try to push the limits too much, and then they hurt themselves and hurt others because they won't be finite. We are created finite before the world got all messed up. And that's helpful to me to know. But every child will test the limits, and they should, and it shouldn't surprise you if you're in charge of a child. And if you're honest, I bet you tested them yourselves. And that testing is the spot, is the point at which learning takes place. It's at that point. And if we do everything to avoid that uncomfortable space where I'm challenging you in some way, then we will not develop over time. There should be a question in there somewhere, but I'm not stopping, so too bad. Okay, the second thing I want to put up here, there's a group of behaviors that helped me raise my children. I have 3 adult married children now, 4 grandkids, and there's a guy named Dan Kiley. And Dan Kiley, I stumbled onto him years ago. How many of you have ever watched the movie Hook? Come on, you can raise your hand. Hook, do you know what Hook is? What's it related to? Peter Pan syndrome, okay? Dan Kiley wrote a book called The Peter Pan Syndrome. And what is the Peter Pan syndrome? Do you know? It's guys that don't grow up. Amazing. What are we talking about tonight? Trying to grow people up, right? How do you grow people up? And so Dan Kiley wrote a couple books about child rearing. And this is the one that helped me probably as much as anything, just hands-on. So here they are. He says there are 5 things that every human on the planet has to be held accountable for. 5 things. You ready? I'll write them up here, but you can write them in your notes. The first one is money. Stuff, however you want to say it. So what do you do with money? If I give you $20 and ask you to go to the bread store or the grocery store and get a loaf of bread, now there are some $20 loaves of bread nowadays, so I probably should say $50 and then, you know. But if I give you, under normal circumstances, and I ask you to buy Wonder Bread, what's that, $1.99 still? I know, it's more, sorry. I don't buy Wonder Bread, so shoot me. But suppose I give you $20 and I send you to the store to get bread. What do I expect when you get back? Bread and change. That's universal. If I make a deal with you to buy something, you expect me to pay you, right? So how you handle money is an ongoing thing. The next thing, Kiley says, is how you handle time. So time is the next thing. What do you do with time? If I say I'll be home by 5 and I come home at 6, what happens? Now, I had to work with my kids on this because this was back before cell phones. Sorry. We did have TV, but it was small. I was very proud of the TV that was small, you know, until I got a big one, and then I couldn't be proud of it anymore. So then I had a lot of explaining to do, how small TVs weren't more holy than large TVs, you know, that you could just be as bad with a small one as a big one. So I had to figure that out slowly. Sorry. That's a confession. Did you hear that? I'm going to deny it if you try to push that on me later. Anyway, my kids struggled with time. Sometimes I'd say, I need you to be home by such and such a time. Well, I learned as a father, for me, that I didn't have a curfew for my children. Now listen to why I didn't have a curfew. I didn't have a curfew because I wanted to be relational with them, and so sometimes I think they should be home at 8, and sometimes at midnight, depending on what they were doing, who they were with, what the purpose was, etc. Because it changes, right? I did a thing with time that way, and we would make a deal. I'd say, you know, if you can't get home on time, then you're going to have a quarter all the time. Well, because back then, a quarter was tantamount to having a smartphone. There were things called payphones. Amazing, right? And a quarter would allow you to call dad and say, we can't make it, we had a flat tire, or there's too many people in the back seat, or I don't know, something, whatever the issue was. And then if my kids would come home late, then we'd have a little discussion about it. But usually before they went, I'd say, if you can't get here on time, what do you think should happen if you can't manage that? And they'd tell me something, and usually it was something like, well, I should not go out next week. And they'd come home late, and I'd say, it's interesting that you chose not to go out next week. I didn't choose it. They chose it. Do you understand that? Okay, so that's just an application of this. So Dan Kiley is just saying, here are the 5 things in life that you have to deal with all the time. The third one is called manners, and that's living with other people. It's interesting where the word manners comes from, but the whole idea is that you can comfortably live with other people. And that's why kids have to clean their rooms, because they're living with other people. I said, when you get out of this house and you rent your own apartment, I don't care how you live. You can never clean it. You can just let the trash build up. It's up to you. That's you. But if you're in my house, then guess what? You're going to have to show up in this way. That's part of the deal, because you're not going to be able to live that way forever. Somebody's going to catch you. You're going to pay the piper, or there'll be a ticket given to you, or some other kind of thing. In fact, I made money in college by helping clean out hoarders' houses in the college town where I lived, and I was amazed at some of those. It's like working in a trash bag. How do you do that? Anyway, I'm still amazed by some of those things. I don't do it for a living now, so anyway, relax. The fourth one is chores. And the fifth one is work. So for kids, what I would say to my children is, you live in a house, there are 5 of us in this family, there's X amount of things that need to be done. We have to cook meals, we have to clean the house, we have to mow the lawn, we have to shovel the walks in the winter, we have to do the dishes, etc. And my kids hated doing the dishes. And so I said, well, what do you want to do? And they'd say, well, we want to cook. And I'd say, okay, so you cook, I'll do the dishes. But you can't cook beanie weenie. You have to actually find a recipe and go to the store. And, we're going to have a meal, Consequently, guess what? All 3 of my kids are good cooks. Why? Because they participated. They made a contribution. We were saying we have to distribute the chores in this house throughout the energy source that we have, and you all can participate. One time my son, I asked him to edge the lawn. Now, I don't know if you know what lawn edging is anymore. Maybe we don't have lawns in California. I'm not sure what you do out here, but I wanted him to edge the lawn, and he didn't think it was necessary, so we had a little conversation about it. I didn't talk to him right away. I just got out the edger and did it myself. And then he wanted me to take him somewhere, and I said, I'm sorry, I can't. I spent that time I would take you somewhere edging the lawn, which was your job to do. So there were consequences. We'll talk about those here in just a few minutes, okay? And the last thing is work. That would be school under most circumstances. Now, here's how this works. Dan Kiley says it this way. If you don't take care of your business, which are these 5 things, somebody will be in your business. You hear it? If I don't pay my bill to the electric company, what happens? They turn off the electricity. And are they mad at me? Excuse me? Are they mad at me? No, there's no emotion at all. It's just matter of fact. You didn't pay, you don't get electricity. Sorry. You pay, you get it back. Whew, amazing. So with my children, instead of me working up a huff and being angry and irritated and exercised, what did I do? I'd say, we need to have a little conversation. And every time, I guarantee you, every time, they hated this, by the way, but all 3 of them knew exactly what we were going to talk about. I didn't have to tell them, they knew. Why? Because they have not taken care of their own business. There it is. So thank you, Kiley. One of the things that he gives to us is a picture of what it takes to grow up over time, and that's to be responsible for your own business. You want people to stay out of your business, you take care of it. Pretty straightforward, isn't it? It's concrete enough that you don't have to yell. You know, part of the deal is that you finish this. If you don't finish this task, then we have to have some reckoning. You know, what would you do if you were me? You know, help me. You give me a remedy for you. You're living here, it costs something. Let's see if we can't make this make sense in some way. Is that helpful? So Dan Kiley, you can look him up. I just gave you his book. It'll save you money and time. It's just an interesting concept, isn't it? You take care of your business, I'll stay out of it. Think of how many people don't take care of their business now. We spend more on welfare than we do on, I don't know, dog food or something. I mean, it's just the other way around. We spend more on dog food than we do on welfare. But welfare makes us dependent people. Dependency is the definition of a child and childishness. Okay? One more. There's two guys that are actually in Colorado. Their names are Klein and Fay. I think it's F-A-Y. I'm not sure it's F-A-Y-E. They came up with a thing called Love and Logic, which I think is the closest to God's disciplining us, or God being a father to us, or God being a parent to us. Love and Logic. He loves us, and then you have to have some consequences. So it's love and what can I get away with? So it's the same idea, only they talk about it in terms of application for, you know, just you suffer the consequences of the choices you make, and the choices you make are your choices, and you need to know that, and I want to honor the way that you think. And so if you go outside without a coat, instead of me running around making sure that you have a coat on and being a helicopter parent, maybe I can allow you to learn that it's cold outside and that wearing a coat might be to your advantage in some way. So Klein and Fay, Klein was a school principal, and Fay was a child psychiatrist, and he's a very, very good child psychiatrist because I've read his books that he wrote specifically about that. So their application is dense and substantive, and they're basically saying this is a way that you can treat children in a productive manner. Okay? So those are some resources for you to think about in terms of just general things. So I would like to spend the last bit of time here talking about a model that's helped me think about child development, child rearing, etc. And the model goes something like this. There are 4 C's. This would be a preacher's dilemma, maybe, if you will. The bottom one, the foundational one, is that kids, when they're born, essentially need to be taken care of. So I call it caretaking. So that's the bottom one, caretaking. No human child can survive by itself without somebody taking care of it in some way. There are animals that come out ready to run, ready to work, ready to go, ready to fight, ready to survive. Humans aren't like that. We're too complicated. And so our developmental curve is not just a month or two, it's actually probably 10 years, 9 to 10 years, before a human child could live by itself without help or assistance or aid from somebody else. And then I'm probably stretching it. 8, 9, or 10, it would be tough to put a human child in the woods without some skill sets. Does that make sense? So caretaking is the first stage with little tiny kids. And if you don't get that message early on, it causes problems. Let me see if I can describe that for you. A child that's not taken care of, not emotionally attended to. So if a child has a need and is crying, It takes the father or a mother or both of them together to try to figure out what that cry means. Because a child doesn't have verbal ability to say, hey, my toe hurts, or it's the diaper again. You know, it's been on way too long and it doesn't fit anymore, or, you know, I don't know, I look bad in it, or whatever a kid might say to you. The idea is, can you read them well? Well, if you can attend to a child's needs or at least respond to them in some way, and it's in a nurturing form, you're in a different ballgame. We don't want to nurture because nurturing takes too long. Nurturing is a slow process. Nurturing, you can't nurture a plant by pulling it up every day and checking the roots and then plugging it back in the ground. You'll kill the plant, right? You can overfeed the plant, you can underfeed the plant. Nurturing is a skill set that we don't teach very well, but that's how we all start. So let's see if I can draw you a little diagram about this. The caretaking is a fundamental piece of the puzzle developmentally, and so I'm going to draw a graph here, and along this axis will be maturity, and along this axis will be age. And ideally, the graph should look something like this. I should expect developmental growth, so at this age, I would expect this level of maturity. So if I'm 5 years of age here, then I expect 5 years of mature behavior, if you will. I don't expect 25 years out of a 5-year-old. I expect 5 years out of a 5-year-old. So I have to have some understanding of what a 5-year-old is like. What can I expect from him, what not? One of my trainings was when I was doing doctoral work, and had a practicum to do, and I worked with a room full of schizophrenics, actually, and most of them were in their 20s, or somewhere late teens, early 20s. They were all diagnosed schizophrenic. They were in an institution at the time, and we were doing a project with them. And most of this particular group of guys were, we used to use the word retarded. We now use the intellectually challenged, I think, or, you know, whatever cleans that up for you, right? They were not functioning at a high level. And I had a project to do with them, and my group wasn't doing the project very well, but everybody else in my class was. So we had about 6 of us in this institution doing the same project with different kinds of groups, and my group was miserable, and I hated to report on it, and when I did, I was embarrassed, and I thought I should get out of the field, and I didn't know what I was doing, and there was a psychiatrist that was leading it, and he looked at me one day, and he was very kind to me, and he said, can you tell me about that group? And I told him it's in, you know, Center B, Group 3 or whatever it was. And he said, oh, yeah. And he turned around, he got this book out. And he opens the book, and the book is about developmental stages. And he said, now, which group is that again? And, he was playing like, do you know who Columbo is? Anybody ever watch that? You know, Columbo was the guy that went, huh? Could I ask you a question? I mean, I just don't know what's happening here. I'm not sure. And that's how this psychiatrist was. I thought, he's not very bright, you know. He's asking all these questions. I think he knows the answer, you know. And anyway, he said, now, which group? I told him, and he said, and what's their mental age? And their mental age was less than 5. And he said, well, here's the developmental chart that'll tell you what to expect from a 5-year-old's brain. I was treating them like they looked, not like they functioned. Functional age matters. My group caught up in 1 week with a shift in perceptual functioning to match their actual developmental age. Does that make sense? So, and that stayed with me, and it helps me understand people much better, because people function at certain ages where they stop development for some reason. There's a singing group, I think, a band called Arrested Development, but Arrested Development really comes from psychology. People who have arrested development have some kind of trauma, some kind of perceptual shift, some kind of miscommunicated message, some kind of distorted perception that stops them at some point. And you get a message. And that's what these bloodline discussions are. You get a message as early as infancy, where you don't have language, but you have behavior. So you're treated a certain way. And if a kid's sensitive, you could treat a sensitive kid one way and treat his brother or sister exactly the same way, and the brother or sister may not be as sensitive, and so one takes a hit and the other one doesn't, and you can't figure out why. I did the same thing with both of them. But the stories are different. My sister is 5 years older than I is. She's dead now, and we had a time to have a conversation to try to talk about our upbringing, and I still remember sitting on the porch and we were videotaping it, and it was a great conversation actually. But my sister and I had such divergent views of the very same event. It was like we weren't in the same planet, let alone in the same room when those things happened. And we were fully functioning adults talking about our histories. Do you think perception doesn't matter? The Bible talks about it this way. It says, be renewed by the transforming of your mind. That's what making a new perception. That's what revising a way that you've thought about something. That means telling the story in a different way. I was sitting at a table with a group of family members eating, and I was down at one end with a kid that I didn't know very well. He was about 17, and he was fun, and we were enjoying the conversation. His mother was at the other end of the table. There were about 15 of us at the table. And his mother had said something about a dog that had died in their family. And this kid, I could see him. He heard her, and he turned and he said, "What?" And so the whole table stops, right? And he says, "Is that the dog I killed?" And she looks at him like, "You're crazy. You didn't kill any dog." And he said, "Well, yes, I did." He had the story and had carried that story for 10 years, or 7 years, like he was 17 or 18. Since he was 10 years old, he had carried a perception of an event that happened in their family. The dog did, in fact, die, but he had nothing to do with it. But he had picked it up as his responsibility. And 7 years later, he's arguing with his mom at the other end of the table, struggling to have to change his perception from his mother's view and what his view was. Now, you have no way to go back and test it. What we know now is that children in this first 5 years of life, most of us don't have good memories about that at all. Then our memory is freighted anyway. It's really a mess. And so when you watch eyewitness news, be careful. There's a gal that wrote about her own story as a child, and she said she was reading, her dad would read her this book every night, and it was the same book, and they loved reading it, and it was such a game, and they played the game with it, and he would change the words, and she'd catch him, and it was great fun. And she wrote about that in a textbook that she wrote about social psychology, and she was reading she was trying to edit her chapter that she had written in this particular book. And she got up from reading it, and she was going to bed, and she said she saw that book, that childhood book, on the shelf in the hall, and she pulled it off just to remind her of how much joy she had with her dad. Her dad was dead at that point in time. And she looked at the book, and she opened the front piece and looked at the date that it was published, and the date that it was published was after her father had died. She wrote this in the book. Now, it wasn't that her father didn't have an interaction with her and they didn't have fun with the book. It just wasn't with that book. Your memory, my memory, is unreliable in that sense. We argue from it all the time, don't we? Like we're sure. Perception is a living thing, and it's a moving thing, and you can change perception to anchor it in greater reality. That's why we need one another. You can't see your own backside. You can't see your own butt. You need somebody else to tell you that, oh, gosh, please, cover that up. Or, you are trailing toilet paper, and if you don't believe me, look. And it's about 100 yards long, and geez, would you stop? Whatever. How about spinach in your teeth? That's probably a little less offensive. But the point is, this piece is so significant. So watch what I want you to do with this. If this is average development, normal development, expected development, what happens to most of us is there are mitigating forces that force this line down. So the line, instead of going straight up, begins to curve this way. And if there's
some kind of violation of trauma that occurs here, something that's done to you. Now, listen to me carefully. Something that's done to you or said to you or left out. If you don't discipline a child, or if they have no limits, you are actually being abusive. Life's full of limits. Now, just having limits for limits' sake isn't the game. But the point is, without it, it has an impact on your development. Am I making sense? When did I say your whole brain comes online? Yeah, isn't that discouraging? 30. By the time you're 30, you don't care. Who cares, you know? So during this period of time, I think you could kind of draw a circle around this thing and say this period of time is freighted with all kinds of misperception storylines that may or may not be accurate, or they may be mixed with another storyline, or they may be enhanced, or they may be pure fantasy, or they may be a lie transferred through the years. And, you know, if you tell a lie long enough, you're going to believe it. Did you know that? Pretty soon it becomes like a legacy or a tradition, and pretty soon you actually believe the lie that you're telling, even though there's no data to support it. How much of that is being exposed now because AI has all this information available, and all of a sudden you find some major player that, you know, said he did such and such when he was young, and now he's not, and he never did that. He didn't play in the NFL, you know. But he's told that story to his family, and then he's told it, so he almost believes it, and time again, we find that stuff exposed. Well, if you're going to be healthy, you need to live close to reality where you can test that stuff, where that gets exposed, where it's like turning a light on and you're saying, that's bad, we need to fix that, or that's really great, and we need to honor that, whatever the case may be. We need to give weight to the fact that those things occur. So you have this period of time where caretaking needs to take place, probably up until about age 10, I'd say. So we go out here at age 10. Okay, so we're looking at this period of time right here in particular. And it's because up until that period of time, a child needs containment, I guess would be the way to say it. They need to be cared for, so it's not really healthy to put too many requirements on an infant. And everybody's got their opinion. Should I let the baby cry? How long should I let the baby cry? This baby's driving me nuts. You know, I had a friend of mine whose kid was colicky, cried all the time, second child, and his wife was just beside herself, and he said, oh, I'll take care of the baby. So he got her, and he put her in a car seat, and he took her into another room and stuck her in the closet, closed the door, and went back to bed. And when he tells that story, you go, oh, that's child abuse. It would have been child abuse if he'd have kept trying to interact with it. Wasn't hurting the baby survived, et cetera, et cetera. I did the wedding for that baby later on. She did survive. She's a lawyer, but and she sued her. No. So, okay, Dad, now's the time. You know, you're going to cough it up. No, I just think, why did he do that? Well, he had enough awareness of his own angst and his own frustration and his own emotional world that he protected the kid. Now, we might say, oh, my goodness, you know, you could be, today, you'd probably be charged with something. But the point is, kudos to him for having enough self-knowledge to honor both himself and the child simultaneously without hurting either. Does that make sense? So this period of time is freighted. Most of us have stories that come out of this. By the way, much severe mental illness comes from these first 4 or 5 years, and it's called pre-verbal time. So things that happen to you pre-verbally are felt and experienced, but you have no language to manipulate it. We are language creatures. Language matters. The kind of language we use, how we use it, how we tell a story really does matter. And so And that's why the Bible's so marvelous. It's a narrative. It's a story. It's not a bunch of rules. It's got some rules to it, but it's primarily a story. And it should be a compelling story when we realize the people in the scriptural stories are crazy. I don't know if you've ever read the Old Testament, but I mean, it's crazy. And you think, I still read it, and I go, oh my goodness, I forgot that was in there. Who, really? And but it's telling us something, isn't it? It's telling us that it takes a community to satisfy our needs, to be able to navigate the complexity that is growing up, being a human growing up. We are so dimensional and so have so many elements at play. It is not binary. It is multi-dimensional at best. And we tend to just narrow it down to one thing, and so we say this event is what caused all this, and it's usually not that. It's usually 20 events that all come together at one time, and all of a sudden they have an impact, and only one piece of it gets attended to, and so that's the one that gets the credit, even though it could be all the other 10 together that really pushed it over the edge. So a lot of us carry around all kinds of storylines that aren't telling us the truth. And one of the things that the Bible tells us is that you need to get your story straight. You need to know the details of your story. You need to know the history of your story. You need to know where your story came from. You need to know why the story's been told the way it's been told. And then you need to start learning what God's story of you is. Because God's story will trump your story every time. And I don't care how vicious your story is. Some of us have mild stories, and some of us have really harsh stories. It doesn't really matter. What matters is what they mean to you, and then how you expose that story so that you can actually give it some language and put it in a redemptive package, in a package that says there is a way to get through this in a healthier form. So you want to give your kids something? Then you do that work in your own life, because you cannot, I'm going to go back to it, cannot give them something you haven't done yourself. Don't hide it. Don't pretend. My mother-in-law thought she kept secrets. And she did. She was pretty tight-lipped about it. She didn't talk about her history, etc. But I think the whole family knew there was secrets. And then I read one day in a marriage and family textbook, there are no secrets in families. They always come out somehow. People know. And by the way, children are emotional sponges. Did you know that? They suck up everything in their atmosphere. They don't miss a thing. They can, if we could just hear them, we shut them down usually. But if we could have the context in which they can share and communicate, and we wouldn't say, oh no, don't feel that way, or that's not true, or you can't, just listen to them. If they see it that way, that's the way they see it. Whether it's right or wrong is immaterial at that moment, unless they feel safe enough or open enough or present enough to share. Guess what? You are not going to participate in their world. And I bet every one of you have secrets that you've kept from your own family of origin. Every one of us do. Secret keeping is devastating, and biblically, the biblical model is that you're supposed to push that stuff out here in the light where you can see it. Because you can't deal with it if you can't see it. If it doesn't have a name, if you don't call it out, if you don't attend to it. And there's nothing horrific enough that it passes God's test of his loving you. There just isn't. And yet we think we have to posture in a certain way or look a certain way. Or most parents are terribly ashamed when they get a call from the school that they come in. It's not about you, it's about your kid. You're not your kid. You don't live vicariously through them. That's not helpful for any child. Okay, the next phase I want to talk about is not just the caretaking phase, which kind of we grow out of a little bit when the child starts being an adolescent. Do you know when an adolescence starts? Age 2. Have you ever been around a toddler that was smart and verbal? Yeah. That's the beginning of adolescence. No. Hurry up. And they use big words, A friend of mine had a 2-year-old, and she was eating chicken noodle soup. And she looked at her grandmother and she said, "Grandma, that looks like an auger." It was a curly noodle. A 2-year-old? Where'd she get the word auger? I bet some of you are wondering what it means. Auger? That's my dog's name. No, I don't know. All right, so the second layer here is the most fun one and where almost everybody gets stuck, and it's called being a cop. I don't mean any disrespect for anybody that's a policeman in here. Being a cop means that you keep the child out of the street. Being a cop means you don't allow a 10-year-old to drive your car. Why? Too much risk, right? So it's a kind of a risk-reward challenge at that point. So the biggest part of parenting, and where almost all parenting discussion stops, is at this phase. And the time that the cop period begins to end is when a child can begin to understand what it means to take responsibility for their own choices. And so one way to think about it is this way. I wrote this down just so I wouldn't mess it up. It says you have to be willing to allow your child to be in pain. And a cop knows that. A cop knows that if you eliminate all painful struggle, challenge, etc., you are weakening the child's capacity to be a whole human being, because all of life is a struggle. At my 60th wedding anniversary, I said to the crowd there, because they were asking me to say something about being married that long to such a beautiful lady, and I said, one of the things you need to know is that last night we had an altercation. Like, should you say that at a 60th wedding anniversary? I said, and what you need to know is that's a testimony to us being fully alive. We're still growing. We're still learning. There's no end to it. You cannot exhaust knowledge of another person. The cop is there to protect. Policemen used to be called peace officers. Think about it. Peace officers. How do I create an atmosphere where there's enough peace that you can take the risks you need to take and fail and get up? And there's a remedy for you to get back up again. So one of the things I wrote down here about this cop thing is that you cannot control your child. And if you want to write a second thing down today, that's what I would put in there. You try, you can't, because something will break. The spirit, or it will make them stiffer and more harsh and less bendable and less malleable and less nimble and less ability to learn. You want to draw a kid into his capacity to be who he's made to be. So here I wrote this. I said, every human being is born on our planet with only the potential to become capable, not with the capabilities themselves. They all have the potential. We have to guide them into the capable side of it. Okay? So, you can't control your child. You can control the environment. As one person said, nature does not have rewards and punishment. Nature only has consequences. We are forever removing the consequences and thinking that people can't recover from that. One of Dan Kiley's, the thing that made that so powerful was my kids knew that if they didn't take care of their business, I was going to be in their business. And I wasn't going to be punitive. I was going to be forward-looking and saying, okay, now where are you going to go from here? So here's a hint biblically. There's no punishment in discipline. Discipline is future-oriented. Punishment is always backwards-oriented. What did you do? How can I make you pay for that? Discipline says, what can you learn from what you did? Where are you going to go from here? How can you clean up the mess? How quickly can we get through this? What is there a remedy? One of the things that a lot of times we leave out, and I just want to say this so I don't forget it, is a child always needs something that will welcome them back. They always need an avenue of repair. They need to know that they can return. They need to know that this isn't final. They need to know that you're still there. They need to know that they can make a mistake and get up. And one of my best examples is every person in here that can walk, you learned how to walk the same way. You failed at first more than you succeeded. You had diapers and you were closer to the floor than you are right now, so it probably wasn't a bad thing. But, I mean, if I sat down like most babies sit down when they can't walk and they just, I'd have brain damage, I'm sure, because I just couldn't do it. But they can. They're shorter. Their limbs are shorter, and then they're built for that, and they can fail, and they fail, and they fail, and they fail, and they get up again, right? And do we chastise them for it? Do we shame them? No. We think they're cute. Right. Oh, what's he going to do? He took his first step. Not while I wasn't there. Oh, come on. Did you get it on film? What do? We delight in them, don't we? They finally learned. Here's a rule. Learning is its own reward. You do not need to reward somebody that's learned something. Learning will reward you on its own. Back in the old days, we used to have shoelaces. Do you know what shoelaces are? You have to tie them. They're not Velcro or snaps or, some super gimmick, clicky things. No, you have to tie them, right? And so my kids, when they were little, we had to teach them how to tie their shoes. And one day we were going to church, and my kid had these cool little shoes. They were Oxfords. And Nancy looked at me and she said, "Did you tie his shoes?" And I said, "I don't think so." And she said, I thought you did. And she said, "I didn't." And we looked at him, and he said, he didn't say anything. He didn't need to say anything. Why? There it was. He tied his shoes, I mean, we never got them untied, but that didn't matter. Does that make sense? Okay. Being a cop is what most people think of parenting, trying to control the child. And I just want to make the point, what did I say a minute ago? You cannot control a child. You can try. I was at a wedding one time, and this kid came over, and he sat down next to me with his father, enraged. I mean, his head was red, everything, and he said to the child, "You sit there and don't you get up?" Well, the kid, I don't know, taking the cake apart or something. I don't know what he did that was so awful, but he was sitting next to me. And I looked down at him. He looked up at me and he said, "I'm sitting on the outside, but I'm standing on the inside." That's defiance, baby. You may think you're controlling me, but guess what? All right. I think that's enough for tonight. You should be exhausted and waiting for the football game next year or something. So, are we okay? Where's Anthony? Did he run away? I guess he did. Anyway, we have time for some questions now, a little bit. So I'd like to try to field those somewhat. I just feel like I got started. This is kind of the introduction. Is that okay? All right. All right. Ah, the chairs.
All right. How's everybody doing? Yeah, great. Yeah, some of you, I saw some of you. I sat in the back for the first time, and every now and then he would say something, and I would see a few of you go like this. I know what that body language means. All right, well, we have a few questions. I don't know if we're going to get through all of them, but we'll get through some of them. So here's the first one. How do you allow your children to struggle without feeling guilty for their failures?
They're not you. They're not you. If you intervene, it would be like, I heard an orthodontist say this, and it was helpful. He said, we can move teeth successfully to make them all straight if they're crooked. But when you move a tooth, what you do is you stunt its root growth. So there's a price to pay. So when you won't allow them to fail, won't allow them to make mistakes, then we actually stunt their ability to grow. So that's the conceptual way to think about it. I think the hard part is to say,
When you've got to do some of your own work, because at least from me, I've raised 3 adult children, and I can't tell you the number of times where their behavior or their failure made me feel like it was my failure, and the only way to divorce that is to do my own work, separate and independent from that. That's the best gift that you can give to your kids is a fully regulated you.
that's right. And I think you said an interesting thing. They made me feel like. And the truth is, my wife hates this statement, by the way, and she's not here, so I can get away with it tonight for a minute or two. You can't make anybody feel anything. It's not possible. And it's because people respond differently to the same stimulus. So if you are picking up your child's emotional world and trying to read it, not for their sake, but for yours, then you're in trouble. And that's the dysregulation that you're talking about.
Yeah. One kid has big emotions and needs more attention. The other is easier. How do I balance giving both kids what they need when one requires so much more?
Well, life's not fair. Have you ever heard that? And every kid in the world will pick up on that. And I think one of the lessons that you can teach anybody is that the world's uneven. Some people are smarter than others.
So would you not? Would you advise someone under this scenario, which I think if anybody who has more than a couple kids understands
Sure,
the dynamics of this scenario? So don't try and balance out the time. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't try. You would treat each kid as their own thing, and then understand that you are parenting in an imperfect world, and there will be.
Well, it's a unique world that's not uniform. So we talk about unity sometimes.
Yeah.
Unity is not being uniform. And so your kids aren't uniform. They're each unique individuals. And so, I mean, it's a lot of challenge to treat each of us as unique. And it means that you have to study that person. And I just don't think we take the time to study. And so when I was talking about television started for me in the 50s, and that's a long time ago. And what it did was it robbed us of time to communicate in the family. I mean, the time we spent in front of the television, we weren't talking to one another.
So to synthesize this for a moment here, what you're saying is like you actually can sort of balance this out, but you need to choose to take that time from something else that you're unwilling to give up sometimes.
That would be one, and then
Yeah.
and then to understand that you have the differences between these. Here's one child that's demanding. Well, there's a reason. So here's another statement you ought to scribble down if you're a scribbler. Would be that all behavior is caused. Now, I don't like that statement, but I think it's true. So our job is to try to figure out what's generating that. Well, that's trying to understand the perception that person has. And I'll talk tomorrow night about perception specifically, because I think it's the kind of one of the linchpins in terms of being able to understand the differences between two kids. One kid's bigger than life. I mean, and the other kid's quiet and shy. And
All right, you're a storyteller. I gotta keep us short.
Sorry.
How do you determine what is the appropriate level of discipline if the child's brain is not fully formed to comprehend the concept of discipline? I
Wow.
have lots of thoughts on this, but I'm going to let the psychologist talk.
Well, we don't teach discipline very well, because almost always we're trying to rearrange behavior, which is history rather than forward. So if discipline is forward looking, then you're going to ask the question, what do we do now? What do we do next? How do we remedy this, as opposed to, I've got to fix you. So one of the things that I did with my kids was I would ask them, you tell me what an appropriate consequence should be. You tell me what would help you understand better what the consequence of what you
Well,
just
okay,
did
but
was.
depending on the child, they might be like, all right, I'll go to bed with the lights on.
Let them.
Yeah, no. Yeah, so
Won't kill 'em.
the kind of the way that maybe, is what did we learn and where do we go? So that's kind of the two-part rubric to this. So what did we learn? That may take some time for them to comprehend and to understand.
That's right.
And depending on the age and stage of development, that is learned through repetition. And then where do we go from here is, okay, the next time this happens, here's what's going to happen, or here's whatever that
Here's
might
the
be.
consequence.
Yeah, here's the boundary. I can control the environment, but not the child.
That's right.
Yeah, all right. Some say siblings will be siblings, but the kids can be mean to each other. And the kids will call it joking sometimes. I'm guessing this is for teenagers. And it goes too far, but should I let it go? Or others call it normal.
Well,
They're almost belittling each other
Yeah.
through their humor.
yeah, I think one of the things you want to model in a family is respect. And respect needs to be given, and I think you just honor the reality of a person. You don't hurt people. Why? Because you don't like to be hurt. And so how do we manage that? Well, when there's very little glue in our culture, that would be the way I'd want
Can I
to say
tell
it.
a story for a
Yeah.
change? How's that?
Oh, he's a storyteller.
yeah,
But there's very little glue in our culture that holds together that aspect.
My two adult kids do this, and there are two choices. The earliest version of this was stop yelling at each other. Okay. Then the next version of it is don't talk to your sister that way. Then the next version of it is you're making your brother cry because she got better with words than he did. Okay, so, but then as they got even older, then here's where it switched. So we were sitting around a dinner table, and I'm like, help me understand what's happening here. Why do you think why this is helpful? They're both, especially with two kids who are going to church together and call themselves followers of Jesus, I'm asking them the dialogue question. And so then they begin, well, we're just messing around. And I'm like, well, but you guys are kind of not smiling. And so then what it did is it just opened up an entire dialogue about the use of humor and sarcasm and whatever. And because I wasn't interjecting anymore going, stop it, what are you doing? Because now I'm just emotionally reacting to that situation rather than
Exactly.
starting a dialogue as a family about what's happening here. What do you think is good? And then I'll say the thing that nobody wants to hear, which is the earlier version of that is, where do you think they learned it from?
Yeah, and the dysregulation in the family is what they pick up a lot of times. So
Yeah.
one of the challenges is the better regulated you are, the less likely you are to engage that kid with some powerful emotion at first. And you're laying the landscape for them to take responsibility. And responsibility is the axiomatic central piece for mental health.
Yeah.
Can you take responsibility for your choices, actions, personality, character, etc.?
The more when our kids come home, the more I speak to them with love and dignity, and the more that I speak to Shannon with love and dignity, the more all of a sudden that banter starts to tamper down on its own in the house. Because usually it's a defensive reaction to someone saying something, and we couch it under humor.
That's true, and then humor is a softener rather than really being funny. I think that the challenge in a family is to have enough time. Now watch this. Have enough time to spread that out. There's a word in Scripture called patience, and it means to spread out wrath. So instead of making wrath like a knife that just cuts through something, spreading out wrath means it softens that effect, right? So I need space to do that. I need space for the kids to do that. That's why you say full stop. Nancy and I would not agree on discipline. I taught classes on child and adolescent behavior, and actually she took a class. She got a B in it, but that's
Stay on
from
target.
me.
Stay
Anyway,
on target.
okay,
We're
so anyway, one of the things that we would do with our kids, because we were so different, whoever started the discipline event, who caught, and we'd let the other one take it, and then if I had some questions about what she was doing, I'd say, Nancy, could we talk? And she'd say yes, and we'd just ask the kid to stand there. We'll be back.
Yeah.
Now listen to me. That sounds a little silly, but it's not. You stay here. You think about this. We're going to go talk about what we think should happen, and we'll be back. Now that's slowing it down. In the Bible, it says the Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And that's a Sabbath space to slow down. We think we have to respond in some great way instantly. I guarantee you, if you just take a breath and walk down the hall and come back, you'd have a different response than you'd have immediately. So give space to that intensity. Give space to bleed off that emotion, because it'll change.
Okay, last question. Ready?
I am
This
ready.
is a hard one. Is Jonathan in the room? Where's Jonathan? Well, that's a bummer, because I was going to ask him. So last question is, as a parent, I'm always working and need to financially support my kids, and I need to financially support, but my kids have mental illness, and so I can't come home as much as they need me to. So single parent has to go to work every day to financially support. Kids have mental illness, can't be at home as much as they need them. I don't know what mental illness. I don't know if this is autism or depression or how severe this is. What do I do? And I'll start with, there are lots of resources, and you're going to have to ask for help. We have a huge resource list that we can point you to. We have somebody in our church that is a counselor for the city of Berkeley. I was hoping he was still in here, who can point you to maybe some resources that might be of help. You will be shocked at, for as crazy as California can be sometimes, it is the best in the country at caring for families with these kinds of unique needs. I know that because my son is one. People just don't know that these resources are available. And so it takes a little work. It takes a little of asking someone to help you navigate the system, but the resources are there.
And shame keeps you from asking that question. So asking the question is huge, number one. And number two, one of the points I'm trying to make tonight is when TV came, it's now smartphones, but when TV came, devices then robbed us of the time necessary to do the interpersonal connections that we're made for. So the whole culture is regressive in terms of its skill level.
So meaning we're more isolated, more alone, have access to less information, less connections that might be part of the solution to this
That's
problem.
right. And even, we used to do an open thing when I was pastoring, and at the end of the service, we'd have people ask questions, and one person say, well, I need prayer because I just lost my job, and a guy over here would say, well, see me in for coffee because maybe I could offer you a job. And so, but sometimes it's sitting right here, but there's no way to connect it. So if you do have a list, we need each other to do this. It's just not possible to do this stuff by yourself.
Father God, we thank you for this first night. I know we're just getting started. I know what's coming tomorrow. We're going to talk about complicated things all the way into being adult parents. And so I just ask that you would cover us, that you would remove any sting of shame that goes along with this process. I'm sure that there are people who heard things that think to themselves, oh man, I've messed this up. That is not the story that Jesus is writing here today.
Amen.
And so we can always start again. We can always begin to grow. And if you think it's too late with your kids, you are wrong. That is not the biblical narrative. And so, Lord, I pray that you would cover them with the truth in Jesus' name. Amen.